If you don't find Minions cute or at least funny, it might be because you haven't watched any of the movies in the Despicable Me franchise. But have you ever wondered, among the 899 yellow creatures, is there at least one female Minion? With the announcement of Minions 3, which is set to premiere between 2026 and 2027, this topic has once again started buzzing among fans and within Illumination. We can assure you that many surprises are on the way! Lost female Minion. For a long time, there has been speculation about how many Minions exist, especially since the first movie showed Gru's lair packed with the small yellow-skinned helpers with 1 or 2 eyes who may have been wearing goggles since they began walking on Earth. Some people even counted the number of Minions on the Despicable Me 2 poster, with some suggesting there could be as many as 10,000 servants. However, to clarify this controversy, the film's director and voice actor for the Minions, Pierre Coffin, confirmed in an interview that the current number of Minions serving Gru is exactly 899. So maybe you, like me, are wondering, why exactly 899 and not some other number? And that's precisely one of the reasons why the theory about the female Minion makes so much sense. The theory suggests that initially, there were not 899, but 900 Minions who were bacteria and evolved into beings that inhabit the surface. However, only one of them was female, and the other 899 who now work for Gru are all males. At some point, this female Minion got separated from the larger group, and her current location is completely unknown. But why is she no longer with the other yellow beings, and where could she be? Stay calm, because we have all the possibilities lined up to tell you now. Disappearance. According to this perfectly logical theory, when there were 900 Minions, one of them was only female. And as you probably know very well, it takes 2 beings of different genders for a species to reproduce and increase in number. The problem is that the female Minion, whom we will call Eve, had nothing less than 899 suitors competing for her hand and the chance to be with her. And we know very well what happens when 2 or more Minions want the same thing. Everything turns into a huge mess. The detail is that, as the same Pierre Coffin we already mentioned in this video, the difficulty of imagining female Minions lies in the fact that all Minions are silly and stupid. And that's exactly it. All male Minions are indeed very silly, although they have huge hearts. However, this same rule would not apply to the only female Minion, as she would possess a much more developed intellect than all the other yellow beings she lived with. For this reason, she never managed to choose any of them to be her partner, as they were all extremely childish, and she didn't feel comfortable with any of them. And it's understandable why. And if you also think it would be amazing to have a female Minion in the 3rd movie of the Yellow Beings, comment below, #Eve. So, you can imagine how the only female Minion must have felt increasingly lonely despite having so many suitors at her feet. Moreover, as we discussed in our video about all the Minions' bosses, we can see that one way or another, all the masters the banana-loving beings had ended up dying because of something they were involved in. Like the case of the dinosaur, the first master they had after coming out of the water. The same thing goes for the pharaoh, whom they accidentally dropped a pyramid on and crushed. Or poor Count Dracula, who turned to ashes after they opened the curtains to celebrate his 357th birthday. After witnessing all these foolish acts by her male counterparts, Eve had to make a drastic decision. For this reason, at some point, the only female Minion decided it would be best for her to leave the group of yellow beings and follow a different path from the rest of the group. Missing Eve. If you think about it, this theory really makes sense, because we see that the little yellow beings miss having a female representative in their group, as evidenced in various moments in both the Despicable Me and Minions movies. For example, when Stuart travels with Bob and Kevin to find a new master around the world, he stops next to a yellow fire hydrant as if it were a female of his species. And later, when Bob becomes the King of England, we see him once again with the fire hydrants, this time in the palace bathtub. Moreover, in several moments throughout the movies, we see many Minions dressed as women to go to the supermarket, the mall, or just to pick up Gru from school, as if they were his relatives. All these scenes show that the little yellow beings are indeed attracted to females of their species, if they existed, of course. In fact, we even see in Despicable Me 4 that one of the now AVL agents is on a dating site and finds a female version of his species. But soon we see it's a prank by another Minion creating a fake profile, which is quite common on such sites. Not to mention the many double entendres they make among themselves, as if they were females, even though they're not. The fact is, it's more than proven that yes, Minions are attracted to female Minions. The detail is that so far none of them have actually been shown on screen in any of the franchise's movies, at least not yet. because, as we mentioned at the beginning of the video, it's confirmed that Illumination is already working on Minions 3, and the movie is set to be released between 2026 and 2027. And it could very well be in this movie that we see Eve's story, and, who knows, her reappearance being told. And we have the perfect story about how all this would happen. But before we tell it, if you're not already subscribed, click the button below and subscribe now! In the first Despicable Me movie from 2010, we learn that Felonious Gru was born in 1964. Gru is the result of the relationship between Marlena and Robert Gru, one of the greatest supervillains in history. However, at some point his parents separated while Gru was still a baby, separating him from his twin brother, whom he had no idea existed. From the scenes in Despicable Me 3, we can see that when they were babies, they were very close. Even so, Gru was raised by his mother, and when he was just 9 years old, he saw a man go to the moon and fixated on the idea that he too would go there one day, which was actually his villain DNA speaking louder. Whenever he mentioned this, Marlena, his mother, dismissed his dream, despite his natural aptitude for creating devices, such as his own rocket, which he made using trash and street signs he probably stole from somewhere. Around the same time, Gru and his mother went to the villain convention in Orlando, where we see the two in front of Dr. Nefario's stand, looking at an ice gun. It seems that Marlena bought the gun for her son, as at the end of the same film, we see that the young version of our favorite villain uses it to steal the crown that Scarlet was taking from the Queen of England for the second time. Gru then, with a small Kyle on his back, mounts an aerial device probably built by himself, as Dr. Nefario had not started working for him yet, and returns to the USA with the Queen of England's crown, probably marking his first major act as a villain.
Oh, now I see!
After witnessing the beautiful villainous act of young Gru, the Minions regain their nature and elect him as their new leader, naming him Mini-Boss. Thus, the yellow creatures who had spent hundreds of years without serving any villain see in Gru a new reason to continue existing and follow him to his home. Upon arriving there, Gru rejects them, but after much insistence and a heartfelt plea, Gru takes the 899 minions as his servants. At this time, the group of little yellow beings begins to support Gru's cruel acts, which included a cheese gun to cut in line for ice cream, and super powerful fart bombs he developed to empty the cinema so he could watch the movie Jaws, which was recommended only for people older than him at the time. And if you're a fan of Gru just like us, comment below #MiniBoss to let us know who really loves the villain and Minions movies.
You don't want to cross me?
After betraying and getting rid of their former leader, Knuckles, the Vicious Six ends up sending an invitation for Gru to participate in the selection of the new sixth member of the group, mistakenly thinking he was a dwarf. When they discover he is just a child, they dismiss him immediately. Gru leaves, but not before stealing the Zodiac amulet from the gang of criminals and engaging in a thrilling chase alongside his minions. Knuckles watches everything from afar and then kidnaps Gru, discovering that the boy had no evil plans for the object. The mini-boss and the ex-leader of the Vicious Six then form a mentor-apprentice relationship, even robbing the Bank of Evil and meeting Mr. Perkins, having their first encounter with Vector while pretending to be grandfather and grandson, just to steal the Mona Lisa painting from the financial institution's vault for supervillains. Eventually, the group of villains takes Gru hostage and seizes the amulet, resulting in a final confrontation, with the kung fu-trained minions and Knuckles on one side, and the supervillains transformed into Chinese zodiac animals on the other. Gru and his servants manage to defeat the group, who are arrested by the AVL, led by a young Mr. Ramsbottom, but Knuckles does not survive the fight with Bell Bottom and ends up dying. At least that's what everyone thinks until the funeral, where we see that the supervillain is alive and well and will continue being Gru's mentor. Now Gru had a group of servants, a high-level villain mentor, and an inventor who would work exclusively for him, Dr. Nefario, who sympathized with the boy from the first time he saw him. Around this time, Gru also had a traumatic experience involving his first love, a girl from his class, who actually despised him, as did most of the students at the school. This caused him to develop a fear of approaching women and being rejected, as we will see later. After the trauma at his previous school, Knuckles probably got Gru a spot at the LPB supervillain school through his underworld contacts, where our favorite villain met Maxime Le Mal, who would become his great rival during all the years he was there. Even after graduating from school, they still hate each other.
I hate that guy.
Minions and Gru. It's practically impossible to think of Minions without thinking of Gru, and vice versa. After all, this team has been working together for years, ever since the yellow creatures saw how the little boy froze Scarlet and stole the crown she had taken. However, at the end of Minions 2, we see that Gru's team has gotten even bigger since Dr. Nefario was convinced by those please faces that the boy and his minions make. We see that the scientist ends up taking off in the same aircraft we see Gru using in the first Despicable Me movie. Besides the doctor, we can't forget Knuckles, who helped save Gru and also develop feelings for him, kind of taking on the role of a mentor and father figure that he never had, since his parents separated when he and Drew were just babies. So we're pretty sure Minions 3 will probably start where Minions 2 ended, showing this newly formed team committing new villainies and crimes, with Knuckles guiding Gru on how to choose his targets and giving tips on how not to get caught by the AVL. And on one of these missions to commit a crime, they will end up encountering another supervillain who is an old acquaintance of the former leader of the Vicious Six. And, if you remember well, Gru's mentor is much older than all the other members of the team of supervillains, indicating that he is from another generation. But this new supervillain, who will appear in Minions 3, would be both a rival and an old flame from Knuckles' school days, and she would interfere with Gru's operation. When the mentor explains to the leader of the Minions who this villainess is, they will discover that she currently works as a teacher at LPB, the same school for supervillains that we know from Despicable Me 4. Additionally, Knuckles would say that he couldn't graduate because he got expelled from school due to something his beloved did, and he took the blame. And that's where the story of Minions 3 begins to unfold.
Okay, alright, I get it.
School for Supervillains. After discovering LPB, Gru, who had never heard of the institution, starts wanting to study there and tells Knuckles. However, the mentor mentions to Gru that all the great villains in history, the most famous and biggest criminals, joined forces and created the High Council of Villains and founded the institution centuries ago. He also says that to enter the school, there are some requirements, such as being sponsored by a member of the High Council of Villains. And the other option would be to be invited to participate in a selection process that consists of a competition with several other candidates who also want to join the school for villains. But to do this, you need to receive an invitation from the institution itself, and now that they know Gru is an apprentice of the former leader of the Vicious Six, that won't happen. Furthermore, Knuckles doesn't want to see his old flame again because he knows she married another villain after all these years. The detail is that Dr. Nefario ends up overhearing the conversation between the two and tells everyone present, including the Minions, who also hear everything, that he is very close to the school's principal, Mrs. Ubelschlecht. This is a proven fact, since during the invasion where Gru, Poppy, and the Minions try to kidnap the school's mascot, the Honey Badger, we see near the lever that lowers the mascot's cage a photo of Dr. Nefario and the school principal very close together. My guess would be that they are siblings or cousins. Additionally, Nefario also tells the group that the husband of Knuckles' old school flame died a year ago, trying to pull off a crime that didn't go very well. But the fact is that the doctor manages to get an invitation for Gru through his close relationship with the principal, and he thus manages to participate in the competition, which will take place over a weekend on the school premises. Somewhat like the Wizard Tournament in Harry Potter, which makes a lot of sense since the school for supervillains resembles Hogwarts. And if you're a fan of Gru and the little yellow creatures, prove it and comment below with #Minions.
You don't let me!
Competition. Before the day of the test, Gru would undergo intense training conducted by Knuckles, who also entered the school in the same way as the boy decades ago, so he would know exactly how each of the tests that have been practiced for centuries work. Part of the movie would show this training of Gru, along with the Minions who would be by the mini-boss's side to make him reach the level of villainy and evil necessary to pass the test and enter the school. After a few weeks of training, Gru would be trained and ready to face his competitors for a spot at the school for villains. On that day, we would see some characters in their teenage versions who would also be there to compete for the spot, and they would be judged by a group of school teachers, among whom would be the supervillain Knuckles was in love with. Gru's mentor then proposes to his old flame before the test begins, and she says she will only accept if Gru comes in first place among the competitors. The coolest part is that each of the competitors would have a legal guardian by their side during all the tests, with some of them even being in pairs. Of course, the one who would be with Gru would be Knuckles himself, but we would also get a chance to see Vector himself in his teenage version, with his piranha guns, accompanied by his father, Mr. Perkins. Additionally, we could also see a teenage version of Brat, who would already be a TV star with his series about the mini supervillain, accompanied by his manager, who would be on the phone the entire time. And of course, we couldn't miss Gru's future archenemy in the competition, Maxime Le Mal himself, still a teenager, accompanied by his father, who would also be a very famous villain and a fan of cockroaches, from whom his son inherited his love for insects. Besides them, there would be several other competitors with their guardians there, and Gru would need to come in first to secure his much-desired spot at LPB. At the same time, counting on the support of Knuckles, who had an extra incentive to get married to the schoolteacher, not to mention the Minions, who would be infiltrated and hiding, helping Gru during the tests, just like the cockroaches would help Maxime, the little robot would help Brat, and Vector would have the support of his evil father and his semi-aquatic inventions.
Fires live piranhas. Ever seen one before? No, you haven't. I invented it.
The Minions were officially introduced to the world in 2010 with the release of Despicable Me, and simply by speaking in a language that no one could understand with incredibly cute voices, they became a global phenomenon almost instantly.
Akala na Papoy? No. Papoy. Ah, Papoy.
Moreover, the movie showed that while they could make adorable gifts for their boss's new daughters, they could also operate missile launchers and handle other destructive tools, showing that while they are innocent and silly, they can be very dangerous. And even before they appeared on screens, we can say that it was quite challenging for Illumination to define what Gru's minions would actually look like. At the beginning, the film's creative team had different ideas for the Minions, which could have led them to being a group of humans working as henchmen for an alternate version of Gru, before being transformed into a group of small men who would work mainly as Gru's mechanics. And as a third option, the Minions would have been a group of robots controlled by artificial intelligence who served Gru but spent their free time dancing ballet with his new daughters. However, none of these versions were well received, leading to the idea that they should not be human at all. This resulted in the first designs of Minions as small beings wearing visors with various colors tested, such as red, but yellow was chosen for being more appealing. Even so, the designers felt that some improvements could be made, so the small henchmen took on the form of Elma chip snacks, with round heads and dark eye visors, which were later modified to transparent eye visors. Finally arriving at the Minions design that we know and love, which, as we mentioned, appeared in 2010. But believe me, this was just the beginning of a journey for these small yellow beings that shows no signs of ending. You know what's coming next, right? Get ready for another Cinewave! When the Minions first appeared in the initial film of the franchise, it became clear that their strength was definitely not intelligence, but they were certainly very helpful and loyal to their master. While they could be very evil, we see that they got along very well with Gru's three new daughters, Margot, Edith, and Agnes. Their loyalty to their boss is evident when we see our now ex-supervillain informing his minions that he didn't get the loan needed to complete the rocket and steal the moon. At that moment, the little yellow beings donate all their resources to help complete the project. And if that wasn't enough to prove that they love working for Gru, at the end of the movie, the minions form a human chain and end up saving Margot and her father, who were about to fall to a certain doom thanks to Vector. These were just the first demonstrations that the little beings who love villainy were just taking their first steps in the world of animation. Right after the movie, Illumination, the creators of Despicable Me, had the brilliant idea of releasing 3 short animations, each around 4 minutes long. In these, the Minions return in 3 different stories. In the first, called Banana, it's truly proven that after causing mischief, the thing these yellow beings love most is the fruit that suits them best.
Banana.
In the second, besides the Minions, we see Gru and his daughters again, who receive a visit from a government official checking if the home is good and safe for the children. So the yellow beings help the girls renovate the house to make it just right, ensuring that the inspector approves the girls' stay forever. And in the third, 3 new Minions go through quick training and are then assigned to do a very important job, transporting bombs using their bare hands. Since they are not very smart, of course, everything ends up exploding in the end. Thanks to the huge success of these yellow beings, besides serving Gru, they also became the mascots of Illumination, appearing in the opening of all the films produced by the company, starting with The Lorax, which was the next animated film from the studio after Despicable Me. And since today's video is about these little yellow beings, if you've laughed at least once with them, comment below with #Minion. After becoming so beloved by the audience, it's really impossible not to like the Minions. They made another appearance in Gru's second movie. This time, they weren't just the loyal servants of the world's greatest ex-villain, but they also played crucial roles in El Macho's plan for world domination. With Dr. Nefario's help, he wanted to create an army of monstrous, indestructible purple minions. This would make him an unbeatable villain, but everything worked out in the end, and our little minions turned back into their yellow, adorable selves after being hit by a barrage of low-quality jelly made by themselves at the beginning of the movie. In other words, as we mentioned, the movie revolved heavily around our beloved Minions, and many consider it the best film in the franchise. Minions 3. From our experience with the first 2 Minion movies, we know that where one movie ends, the next begins. And as we know very well, in the second movie we saw that Knuckles was alive, and he reunited with his pupil, Gru. At the same time, we have to say that the Minions have been a part of Gru's life since he was a child until now, with him having his family formed and with 4 children. But that doesn't mean they spent all those years by Gru's side, at least not all of them. And that's exactly where the story of Minions 3 can begin. Because as Knuckles trains Gru in the art of villainy more intensely, it means they might need to undergo some kind of intensive training, and for that, they might go to an isolated island in the Pacific where there is a relic carved from a stone that came from the moon that needs to be stolen, but is protected by a tribe that has no contact with humanity. So the old villain takes little Gru on this mission, but of course, it's not possible to take all the servants, so our favorite mini-villain might take Otto to carry his things. Meanwhile, the other minions stay in their master's lair with Dr. Nefario, helping him with whatever he needs to create his inventions as test subjects. However, at a certain point, the main yellow beings, Kevin, Bob, and Stuart, while looking at the photo of the artifact to miss their mini-boss, notice that in the same photo in the background, with some difficulty, you can see Eve, the only female minion, trapped in a place with wooden bars made by the tribe that owns the sacred relic. At that moment, they go to the airport and steal a small plane to go after Eve and rescue her from the savages who are holding her captive. When they arrive, they find Gru and Knuckles tied up at the edge of the island's volcano, because when the duo was about to steal the relic, they were captured by the tribe members and ended up discovering Eve's presence on the island, learning about the existence of Minion number 900, and also knowing that there was always a female version of the yellow beings. However, they realize that Eve is actually much more intelligent than the common minions and is considered a goddess by the tribe, whom she manipulates at her own pleasure. And to keep her secret away from the others of her species, to avoid them finding her and pursuing her hand, she would need to throw Gru, Knuckles, and Otto into the volcano, thus erasing any trace of their visit to the island. However, just before they are engulfed by the hot lava, the 3 main minions appear and manage to save the group from certain death. They also see Eve again, but end up choosing to leave since the plane wouldn't have enough fuel for much else. When they return to Gru's lair, they tell the other yellow beings, who then go to the island with Dr. Nefario, Gru, and Knuckles to steal the relic, but find out that the female minion and the relic have already disappeared, and only the savage tribe remained on the island. After that, there is a scene where Eve is wearing a necklace with a piece of the relic hanging from it, dressed very elegantly and entering a huge building right in the middle of a big city. And as the scene pans out, we see that the building Eve is entering is actually the AVL headquarters. Thus, the movie would end, proving that the female minion not only exists, but is extremely intelligent and is directly connected to Gru's recruitment by the Anti-Villain League. And who knows, might even be Lucy's mentor, just as Knuckles is Gru's. And who knows, she might also be the founder of the Mega Minions project. Tell me, wouldn't a story after graduating from school, Gru fully embarks on his profession as a supervillain, committing some of the world's greatest crimes, always inspired by great villains like his own father and El Macho, invading museums, banks, and stealing the miniatures of the Statue of Liberty and the Eiffel Tower from Las Vegas, not to mention the giant screen from Times Square. But all this was training for his greatest plan, which he had since childhood, to steal the moon. After stealing the shrink ray developed by an Asian country, Gru is robbed by Vector and devises a plan to adopt the girls selling cookies to the nerdy villain, as a way to invade the place and get his ray back. Over time, the villain grows fond of the girls, to the point of loving them more than himself, forming a happy family, while Vector is sent to the moon after our villain decides that the girls are more important than achieving a dream. After leaving the villain life behind, Gru opens a jelly-making company, but the taste of the sweet is terribly awful, and Dr. Nefario decides to accept a new job offer and leaves the team after decades of service. The scientist's new employer is El Macho, whom everyone thought had died, but actually had a plan to use the minions to create a super army for global domination, with the help of a serum developed by the doctor. Lucy is then sent to the AVL and offers Gru a freelance job at the agency to stop the villain, with everything turning out well in the end thanks to Gru's horrible jelly, which served as an antidote to the serum, and with Dr. Nefario undoing all the harm he had done. After everything, Gru overcomes his fear of talking to women and proposes to Lucy, bringing her into the family, and the girls accept her as their mother. If you've made it this far, you're definitely a fan of animated movies and cartoons, so make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're not already, so you don't miss our new videos that we post every day.
Thank you.
Even without being raised by his father, Gru always knew he was descended from a long line of supervillains, as he always had a family tree on his wall. However, he discovers that one person is missing from his lineage, his twin brother, whose existence his mother always hid from him after making an agreement with his ex-husband where each of them would raise one of the children. Gru and his family go to Fredonia, the country where his father and Drew, his brother, lived, and discover that when he was alive, his father was one of the greatest supervillains in the world and was proud of him and his villainous actions, always keeping an eye on the other son. Drew and Gru quickly develop a brotherly relationship and face Brat, the new supervillain who planned to dominate the world and take revenge on Hollywood after having his supervillain show canceled for being too old. After the return of the Minions, who revolted and spent some days in prison where they became the big bosses, Gru and Drew managed to defeat Brat, and Gru regains his job at the AVL, which he had lost precisely because of Brat.
You're fired!
What?
That's totally not fair!
Drew lacks much aptitude, but has the desire to keep the family tradition and be a supervillain, so he steals Gru's jet and leaves with the Minions, who also wanted to return to mischief. Gru then becomes a high-level agent within the AVL and goes to the 1985 alumni reunion, the class he was a part of, with the main goal of arresting his arch-rival from school, Maxime Le Mal, who had transformed himself into a half-human, half-cockroach. After succeeding, Gru returns home, and we see that the family has grown, with the couple having a new child, Gru Jr., who loves his mother and hates his father for some unknown reason. Maxima escapes and kidnaps Gru Jr., transforming him into a half-cockroach baby. With the help of Poppy, a fan of Gru who is his new neighbor, Gru reaches his enemy, and in a final showdown, the love of our villain for his son makes the baby break free from Maxima's potion trance, and the two defeat the villain with the help of the Mega Minions, created by the AVL to protect the world, in the style of the Avengers and Justice League. Gru then rescues Gru Jr., who, with the help of Dr. Nefario, returns to normal. Thus, the whole family and the Minions reunite once again, this time with the little baby accepting his father and showing love for him, while Maxime is also transformed back into a human and placed in the AVL prison, where we discover that all the villains who appeared in the franchise, like Scarlet and her husband, the Vicious Six, El Macho, Brat, and even Vector, who returned from the moon, are kept imprisoned. As in all Despicable Me movies, the ending is always accompanied by a fun song with various characters dancing happily, which is certainly very entertaining. Spot at the school. After several tests and a few days of competition, we would see that at the top of the competition would be Maxime and Gru, who would be the top contenders, mainly because the Minions would sometimes help their mini-boss and other times hinder him, as they have done many times before. The final test would be a thrilling race in their flying vehicles where Gru would use a mini-vehicle built by Dr. Nefario as if it were a reduced version of the scientist's main ship, while Maxime would use a smaller version of his flying cockroach robot. And after an extremely tight race with several collisions and explosions, we would see both Gru and Maxime reaching the finish line completely charred, and both passing out and failing at the same time on the line, with everyone thinking that the winner would be Maxime. However, upon analysis by the school's supercomputer, it would be determined that Gru's long nose caused a technical tie. And meanwhile, the Council of Teachers is debating what to do, since there has never been a tie at the end of a competition to enter the school for villains. Outside, Knuckles would be listening to everything and would hear his old flame defending that Gru should get the spot at the school, making the boy's mentor proud and even more in love, because he understands that she is doing this to marry him. On the other hand, Principal Ubelschlecht would argue that Maxime should be chosen. As we saw in Despicable Me 4, he has always been the favorite student of the top dog at the School of Villains. This will definitely be a difficult decision, but there is one decision that is very easy to make. Subscribe to the channel right now if you haven't already. Just click the button below.
This is brilliant.
Back to the story of the third Minions movie. When the principal was about to make the final decision, her secretary enters the meeting and announces that she has a call from the president of the High Council of Villains. She then transfers the call to the phone on her desk, and Principal Ubelschlecht, talking to the president of the Council of Villains, changes her expression and becomes very serious. When she hangs up the phone, she announces that the council has decided to intervene this time in the school's decision and determined that a technical tie should be considered, and both students should be accepted into the institution. On the other side, we see the hand of the president of the High Council of Villains hanging up the phone, and when he turns his chair around, we see that he is none other than Robert Gru, Gru's biological father. And as soon as we see him, he says to himself that he will always be watching his son. Then Drew, Gru's twin brother, enters his father's office and shows him the new weapon the blonde-haired boy built, but it ends up falling apart when he tries to use it. Then the image widens and we see that they are in Fredonia, at the family castle where there are several pigs. Gru and Maxime then receive the news and promise to meet at the start of the school year, where they will continue their rivalry as we see in Despicable Me 4. The final scene of the movie is Knuckles' wedding to his old flame, with everyone dancing once again, as always happens in the franchise's movies, to the sound of some oldies, and the two then go off on their honeymoon while Gru and the Minions prepare to go to school, where they will spend the next few years studying until they graduate in the class of '85. Thus, Minions 3 ends with everyone achieving their goals and leaving the future open for a fourth film, where we would see Gru and the Minions' life in high school. Since the movie is scheduled to premiere in early 2027, we will have lots of news to share with you here on the channel by then. Shortly after, a short animation was released where we see two minions working in Gru's mailroom, and one of them accidentally gets splashed with Dr. Nefario's potion, causing him to keep transforming back and forth into a monster minion. I really enjoyed this Minion short. It was hilarious! Since the Minions were already established as a global phenomenon, Illumination soon released the first movie where the yellow beings were the sole protagonists. This allowed us to discover the true origin of Gru's little servants, who were born millions of years ago and are practically immortal. Moreover, we see that their previous masters ended up dying because of them in one way or another. But most importantly, we got to meet Scarlet, and by the end of the movie, we even saw a cool cameo of a young Gru. This was definitely one of the biggest animation successes of that year. The following year, to keep the Minions fresh in our minds, we saw them once again acting as mascots for Illumination during the opening scene of both movies where the company's logo is displayed, with a special appearance by the Little Yellow Beings. This was the first and only time the company released two films in the same year, and the best part is that both were hugely successful. If one movie isn't enough, and two are great, then when it comes to Despicable Me, 3 is definitely not too many. Just 2 years after the release of the Minions solo movie, we were treated to the third film featuring Gru and his family. And once again, the world's most famous yellow characters took center stage, as this time, even if only briefly, they ended up rebelling against Gru and quitting because he was no longer as evil as he used to be. After wandering aimlessly, they win a talent show and even form a gang that manages to take over the prison where they end up. But after all that, they start missing their master and return to help him defeat the movie's villain, Brat. If you love Minions, Gru, and all the great animated movies, we have good news for you. We post videos about this every day, so click the subscribe button below and join us. Not long after the third Despicable Me movie, we see Gru's loyal minions making another special appearance, but this time at the very beginning of The Grinch, which is centered around Christmas and was released in 2018 as Illumination's big production of the year. In fact, the following year, we saw the Minions and The Grinch together again in a short Christmas animation for 2019. Between 2019 and 2021, Illumination released sequels to two of the films they had launched in 2016, The Secret Life of Pets and Sing. And once again, the opening featured the Minions, who by now had become more than just the face of Illumination. They are practically the embodiment of the company. 5 years after the third Despicable Me movie and the first Minions movie, Minions: The Rise of Gru was released, where we once again saw the Little Yellow Beings as the protagonists. This time, we also got to see how Gru started to become, or at least began the journey toward becoming, the great villain we know from the first movie. And I have to say, seeing the Minions turned into animals saving Gru was definitely one of the coolest scenes in any animated movie I've ever watched. Minions: The Rise of Gru was one of the best films I've ever seen. The following year, we saw Illumination stepping away from their usual lineup and releasing, for the first time, a movie based on a video game. But it wasn't just any game, it was the most famous game in history, Super Mario Bros. And of course, the Minions couldn't miss the chance to make an appearance and represent their creators once again. I have to admit, I couldn't help but imagine what a Mario Kart race would be like with the Minions driving cars built by Dr. Nefario. That would be incredible. To wrap up the Minions' journey, after 14 years of existence, we saw their latest appearance, at least for now, in the fourth Despicable Me movie. In it, the Little Yellow Beings are forced to work for the Anti-Villain League, and 5 of them end up transforming into a variation of Minions we've never seen before, the Mega Minions. Once again, they played a crucial role in the movie, even if they only appeared after Maxime Le Mao was almost defeated. But it was definitely awesome to see the Minions wearing those black suits. Honestly, they looked pretty cool. As expected, Illumination has already confirmed that the third solo movie featuring the Yellow Beings is in production and even has a release date, July 2027. The story is still a mystery, but it's sure to pick up right where Minions: The Rise of Gru left off, which means we'll see the Yellow Beings helping a teenage version of Gru in his quest to become the greatest villain on Earth. This is definitely a movie I won't miss. Minions are probably the funniest characters in the world of animation, and since we have so much fun with them, we've picked out 2 videos for you to continue watching more awesome stuff with us. Just click on the one you want to watch first and sit back and relax. Thanks, and see you next time!